Yo, this is your man Don Calloway with a quick thought on the Republican presidential primary. Let's talk about Tim Scott. Tim Scott is a friend of mine. I like Tim Scott a whole lot, and I think that Tim Scott represents this interesting segment of African Americans who really are conservative, who really would be Republicans. But the thing that I don't think that the major Republican Party national interests have found a way to operationalize is how do we get past the racism? And Tim Scott's conservative mindset is not something that's foreign to black people at all. There's a whole lot of black folks who are deeply pro-life, and they are that as a function of their deep Christianity and faith. There's a whole lot of black people who don't believe in taking government assistance and think that that is a degrading thing and it's not for how we get ahead. Tim Scott has done a lot of amazing work for black folks while in Congress. He was right there with Cory Booker every step of the way on policing reform bills. Of course, we know we have a long way to go on policing reform, but Tim Scott was a part of making federal policing reform a better reality today than it was when he got to the United States Congress. Tim Scott has been amazing for MDIs, Minority Depository Institutions, aka black banks as they're more colloquially known. He has done a lot of work with my firm Pine Street, the National Bankers Association, that's the trade association for black banks and MDIs. Tim Scott was our greatest partner in the United States Senate from his position on the banking committee, and did a tremendous amount of work in terms of access to capital for these black financial institutions who ultimately lend to black people, who support the birth of black businesses. So Tim Scott's office is extraordinarily diverse. He has women in leadership. In fact, he had a black woman chief of staff before it was cool to have a black woman chief of staff. A whole lot of Democrats ran for president and appointed black women chiefs of staff. Tim Scott had one from the beginning in the form of the great Jennifer DeCasper, who is one of the great Hill staffers of all time. And you have to understand that when you are in the United States Senate, that gives people real launching pads for careers in public affairs. And Tim Scott, more so than any Democrat outside of the African Americans of the CBC, have created an extraordinarily diverse staff, and he has put so many black folks on by working for his personal office and working on his committees, that you can really see a legacy in Washington, D.C. and throughout the country of Tim Scott alumni. So I think Tim Scott's message would actually resonate, but for a few things. Number one, I think sometimes he goes too far in making white supremacists feel good about themselves. But also, I think that Tim Scott has not done enough to repudiate Donald Trump. That's a tough spot to be in if you want to win the Republican presidential nomination. But Donald Trump is objectively one of the worst leaders, not only in American history, but world history. And I know him to be a good and decent and conscientious black man. And I would really like for him to kind of stare down that wrong in the face and say, fully distance himself from the president. So I got love for Tim Scott. I have deep political disagreements with him on an ongoing basis, but Tim Scott is a good man who I wish would repudiate Donald Trump and stop making racists feel good about being racist. Obviously, I'm still with Joe, but that's another conversation for another day. Hope y'all are well. Talk soon, y'all. Peace.
Assuming I'm rooting for everybody that's black, or everybody from sports to college class to rap and back.